Hello, friends. This is Mac Payne, the owner and operator of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast, where we bring you news about the Vietnam War and the brave veterans who served there, as told to you by yours truly, a Vietnam veteran. I do this podcast for one reason and one reason only, is to let the world know about the greatness of the Vietnam veteran generation, one as great as any that ever heeded the call of duty from our country. These brave veterans did not receive the gratitude and recognition they deserved when we came home. Matter of fact, many of them were treated rudely. Some were even confronted by noisy, nasty anti-war protesters who expectorated on them. It's a terrible thing. I am hoping that this podcast will help change those wrongs that were done to the veterans when they came home. In the episode that I am announcing in this video was just published, and it is about an exciting subject, and that is B-52 bombers. I had the privilege of flying Cobra gunships in the Vietnam War with the 101st Airborne Division. I flew an A battery, 4th of the 77th Field Artillery. We were an aerial rocket artillery unit. Our primary purpose was to deliver supporting fires to the guys on the ground when they were in trouble. Many times we would go out and shoot missions supporting our guys on the ground, and it was a wonderful feeling. Many times they would say great things about ARA because most of the pilots in our unit were not only excellent pilots, but they were world-class rocket shooters, which is not an easy thing to do. Shoot a rocket from a Cobra gunship and make it go where you aim it. It was very difficult, but our guys were good. One of the things I enjoyed about flying over in Vietnam was seeing the other type aircraft that were involved in that situation. One of the most impressive and one of my favorites was the B-52 bombers. They were amazing aircraft. Amazing in the fact that they first flew in the Air Force in 1955. They've been around for a long time and they're still using them today. They were very effective. In South Vietnam, they were used mostly for arc-like missions. That's when 3 of them would fly in a V formation, and they would drop 500-pound bombs. If you've ever seen an arc-like strike, you would be highly impressed. I saw several of them, and it was like Armageddon. They would drop those bombs, and they would seem to go on forever. You would wonder how anybody could live through one of those arc-like strikes. I know that because one time when I was flying in Laos during Operation Linebacker 719, I flew right through an arc-like strike. Luckily, we survived. I always said, big sky, small aircraft. But the aircraft vibrated terribly, and I was wondering why. And then I looked out the right door and realized, hey, I'm right in the middle of an arc-like strike. Let's get out of here quick. They were very impressive, though. Now, don't get me wrong. I liked all the other aircraft we used in Vietnam, the F-4s. Loved those guys. Then there was the C-7A Caribou that reminded me of a Stuka dive bomber from World War II. Those were great aircraft. The A-1 Sky Raiders, they were something else. Those were propeller-driven fighters that could go out and seemed like they could stay on station all day long. They had long time on the target, and they could carry all sorts of weapons. They were very effective. But I'd have to say, the B-52s were the most impressive to me. In the episode I'm announcing today, which was just published, I take a look at an incident that occurred during Operation Linebacker II. That started in December of 1972. The purpose of Linebacker II was to get the North Vietnamese negotiators to come back to the Paris peace talks because they'd walked out. President Nixon said, come back. They said no. Said President Nixon said, okay, check this out. And he unleashed Operation Linebacker II on North Vietnam, and it was a devastating thing. Hundreds of B-52s went in there and bombed them back to the Stone Ages. And what was interesting about that, those B-52s, is they didn't just take gunfire from the enemy, they gave it back. There were two occasions during Operation Linebacker II where B-52s shot down North Vietnamese MiGs with the tail gunners. Now, who knew B-52s back in the Vietnam War even had tail gunners or machine guns? That's right, though. Those B-52s were equipped with 4 50 caliber machine guns directed by radar. In this podcast episode, I share a story by an excellent writer who describes the events. I was very impressed by the fact that one of those tail gunners that shot down an NVA MiG was a young lad by the name of Albert Moore. He was only 18 years old and he shot down a MiG with 450 cals out of the back end of a B-52. The other hero that did this was Staff Sergeant Samuel Turner. Speaking on behalf of all our fellow Vietnam veterans and the grateful nation, I hereby issue both of those individuals an official Vietnam Veteran News Podcast salute for what they did for their country over there in Vietnam and North Vietnam. I highly encourage you to go over to the podcast website and listen to the whole episode and also look at the pictures on the show notes. One shows B-52s ready to go. Another picture shows the office for a B-52 rear gunner. It looks as complicated as the cockpit on the other end of the aircraft. Had all sorts of instruments in it, radar and other things. And then there's an excellent picture of the tail gunner position on the back of a B-52. It's very, very impressive. I highly encourage you to look at all 3 of those. I've made it very easy for you to go over and look at them. Right below this vintage TV set, you'll find a link to the podcast, VietnamVeteranNews.com. You can click on it and be reading it immediately. But before you do that, you have to pass by another link to Buy Me a Coffee. This is a bald-faced fundraiser request. If you would like to help support this podcast financially, all you've got to do is click on that Buy Me a Coffee. Go down there and buy a cup, 2 cups, 3 cups, whatever you want to. They're only $5 a piece. And it will go directly to helping me pay for this podcast. And I would greatly appreciate it. So please do me a favor. But most of all, do yourself a favor by going over to the podcast and listening to this episode that describes how these 2 brave Air Force airmen shot down 2 North Vietnamese MiGs with their tail guns, quad 50 calibers. That can deliver a lot of lead, and it worked for both of them. So don't delay. Go over and check it out. You will be glad you did. That's right. This is Mac Payne closing out this video. Thanking you so much for listening to it and thanking you in advance for going over and buying me a coffee and listening to this exciting podcast episode. Again, you'll be doing yourself a favor. Thank you very much for listening.